right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julie Langrer. I'm an attorney for the Department of Procurement Services, and today we're going to be covering our bid incentives and programs. We have a number of them, and I'm going to try to touch on all of them, but it's a lot of material to cover in an hour, so please bear with me as I work through these. I would ask that you hold your questions to the end just so that we can get through all of them. Also, just wanted to let you know that because this is a live streamed workshop, we have the microphone up here for questions. You don't have to come up to me. I can pass the microphone around to you just so any listeners can hear your question and my answer. And with that, I'm going to dive in. So I'm going to start with our programs. We have a number of programs designed to help small, mid-sized local businesses, MBEWs within the community. So I'm going to touch on each of these programs, starting with our Small Business Initiative for Construction. So this program is designed to provide opportunities for small businesses in the construction realm. It's a race gender neutral program, meaning that any business that is a small business can bid on SBI projects. There's two tiers. There's SBI 1 and SBI 2. And there's different size requirements for each of these programs. For SBI 1, this is for contracts with an estimated dollar value of between $2 and $3 million. In order to bid on these projects, your businesses cannot be any larger than the SBA size standards for the areas in which you're operating. And those SBA size standards are the same size standards you would need to be for certification. So if you're a certified firm, an MBE or WBE certified firm, you are automatically eligible to bid on the SBI project. If you're not already a certified firm and you meet these size standards, you'll be required to submit an affidavit attesting that you will meet the size requirements for the program. There's one other requirement for SBI. The 51% of the business has to be owned by individuals whose personal net worth does not exceed the size standards that you would need to be a certified firm. So those are the two requirements for SBI 1. For SBI 2, this is for micro contracts or micro construction contracts, so anything under $2 million. In order to be eligible to bid on SBI 2 contracts, because they're micro contracts, we're trying to target those really small up-and-coming businesses. So you have to be no more than half of the size standards for your SBA NAICS code or the area in which you're operating in if you were going to be certified by the city. And the business has to be owned, at least 51% owned by individuals whose personal net worth does not exceed the, half of the, the personal net worth limit for certification. So there's a personal net worth limit criteria for owners, and then there's a size standard for the business. If you're certified, you're automatically eligible for the SBI 1 program. However, because SBI 2, you cannot be more than half of those size standards, we also need you to submit an affidavit attesting that you meet the size standards. So one thing to keep in mind is that because this is an SBI program, we're trying to target small businesses, no more than 49% of the work can be subcontracted out to non-SBE or small business enterprise firms. So if it's an SBI 2 contract, at least 51% of the work has to be performed by the prime contractor or other small firms that meet the size standards for SBI 2. And then for SBI 1, it's the same thing. 51% of the work has to be performed by the prime or other subs that meet the size standards for that program. So that's our SBI program. Our MBI program is very similar, but it's designed for mid-sized firms. What the city realized is that once firms start to grow and they exceed those small business size standards, there's still a big world between the huge established construction companies and the certified world. So we tried to create this program to help those firms bridge that gap. So this is for contracts between $3 and $20 million, and there's two tiers. And this was recently expanded. It was originally $3 to $10 million. So MBI 1 is our larger size standard. It's 10 to 20 million. In order to be eligible, you cannot exceed 2 times the SBA size standards for the area in which you're operating, and no more than 2 times the personal net worth limits that you would need to meet in order to be certified. And then for MBI 2, that is 3 to 10 million, and it's no more than 1.5 times the size standards. So if you are a certified firm, you are automatically eligible for both programs because you fall within the size standards, as long as it's within the areas in which you're certified. If you are trying to bid on an MBI project in which in a completely different area of operation, let's say you graduated from the MBI, or excuse me, the MBE program, but you still want to participate in this program under a different code, you'd have to give us an affidavit attesting that you actually meet these size standards. And all other bidders that are not certified would need to submit that affidavit as well. Like the SBI program, 51% of the work needs to be performed by mid-sized businesses or small businesses. You'll have to submit a compliance plan for both programs. If you've done work with the city before, I'm sure you've seen our MBEWBE compliance plan documents where you complete Schedule C's and Schedule D's. We have those for these programs as well. So rather than telling us your MBEWBE commitments, you'd be telling us your small business commitments or your mid-sized business commitments. And we actually do monitor throughout the course of the contract. So you're required to submit the same type of documentation so we can verify that you're meeting your commitments. A newish program that we have is the non-construction mid-sized business initiative. We have these great programs in our construction world, and City Council recently passed this non-construction program. This is between $3 to $10 million contracts, and in order to participate, you can be no more than 1.5 times the size standards you would need to be certified in a non-construction code. So all of these programs, the non-construction MBI, the MBI construction, and the SBI construction program, the project documents will be labeled and advertised, so you'll know ahead of time whether or not these are MBI or SBI programs and whether or not you can bid. We also, in our buying plan, try to identify any upcoming SBI, MBI projects. So if you fit within these size standards and you're interested in these projects, take a look at our buying plan and you can kind of get a sense for whether our user departments have flagged any projects that are upcoming for these. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about our diversity credit program. This program was designed to increase participation of MBEWBEs, not just for city work, but in private sector work. One thing that we've seen is that oftentimes primes will have certain MBEs, WBEs that they work with all the time on city work, but then they never use those firms again. So this program is designed to encourage primes to also use those MBEs, WBEs on their private work. How it works is that if a prime contractor commits to utilizing and actually utilizes a MBE, WBE certified firm on a private sector contract, they can apply for credit with the city towards MBE, WBE goals on a city contract. So the way you earn it, it's $1 credit for every $3 spent on the private sector contract. The firm has to be certified by the city or Cook County because we have a reciprocity program with the city and Cook County. How it works is you'll basically submit a package applying for credit. And our Affirmative Action Advisory Board will review your packet and make sure that, yes, you've submitted proof, you've actually utilized the MBWE, this is how much credit you'll be authorized. Once we tell you how much credit you've earned, you can apply that once, but apply it more than once, but you can only win one contract with it. So if you have multiple contracts you're bidding on and you have this credit that you've earned, you can apply it to multiple contracts, but you can only actually use it on one contract. So if you bid on many of them, you'll have to ultimately choose which contract you want to apply it to if you end up winning all of those contracts. Your credit does expire after 1 year. We do try to encourage firms to only look back 1 year when they're seeking credit, to not go back to like 2000 and start telling us about firms that they've used in private sector contracts. So we're trying to look at recent jobs that you've done. One thing to keep in mind with this is the private sector contract cannot already have affirmative action goals. So if there's already minority participation, women participation goals for that contract, you can't earn credit because you already had a requirement in that contract to begin with. So this is a great program. I don't know if you noticed, but I've included the municipal code section for each of these programs. So if you're interested in more specifics, you can go right there, or our website also has more information about these. A couple more programs. The MentorProtege Program is a great program. It's designed to encourage prime contractors and MBEWBs that have been working in industry for quite a while to reach back and mentor a smaller business that's up and coming. How it works is there's two different aspects to it. There is a credit aspect where you can earn participation credit and a bid incentive. So how it works is when you are submitting a bid, on your Schedule C and D, you'll need to check that you want to participate in the MentorProtege program, and you'll also need to give us your MentorProtege agreement. The agreement, we have a sample in our rules on our website, but the agreement basically needs to lay out exactly what you're going to do with the firm. You have to show us that the mentor has assessed the protege needs, that you actually understand what it is and what the areas are that need to be developed, and your plan for how you're going to achieve that. The term of the mentor-protege agreement should be tied to the term of the city contract so that we see that you're working for the entire term together to try at the end to help that MBE or WBE protege become more self-sufficient, gain new skills, and be able to go out and get new business. For the credit portion, you can earn 0.5% participation credit, and when I say participation credit, I mean minority or women-owned business participation credit for every 1% that the protege is used, up to 5%. So if a goal is 26 and 6, you could potentially earn 5% of that 26 MBE goal by participating in the mentor-protege agreement or program, as long as you are actually using that protege on your contract. So in addition to that, you can also earn a 1% bid incentive. So there will be, in your schedule C's and D's, you have to identify that you're participating, you have to give us your agreement, and you have to complete the affidavit that is included in the bid package in order to be considered for both aspects of that program.
You said the sample agreement can be found where?
The sample agreement can be found in the mentor-protege rules on our website. So if you go to DPS's website, there's a drop-down box. I think it's in the upper left corner of the page, and there'll be a Rules and Regs tab you can click on. That has the rules for all of our different programs, and then if you go to the mentor-protege ones, at the very end, we have a sample agreement. Target market program. So this program is designed exclusively for minority and women-owned business enterprises, and it's only for non-construction contracts. So in order to bid on a contract that, a project that's identified as target market, you have to be a certified firm. And up no more than 49%, saying that wrong. You can subcontract up to 50% of the dollar value of the contract to contractors who are not certified, but otherwise the rest of the contract has to be performed by certified firms. One thing to keep in mind with this program is we understand that the goal of the MBEW program is to help firms grow. We want you to grow, we want you to get big. So if you bid on a contract and you're a certified firm and you graduate, that's okay. You can continue to participate in the program. What we don't want to see is a firm get awarded a target market contract and then be, all right, I'm selling all my business, somebody else take my contract, because we want these to be performed by certified firms. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're actually a certified firm, you're trying to grow and develop your business, this is a great opportunity for you if you're in the non-construction realm and you see something identified. Okay, phased graduation program. This is the last program I'm going to discuss. So this is a program that is designed to help certified firms ease out of our program. So once you've met the size standards, so there's different size standards for construction and non-construction. So if you are in the non-construction world and you've exceeded the size standards, which are approximately just about 39 million, once you've exceeded that size standard, you're technically not supposed to be part of the program anymore. But what we found is oftentimes firms will graduate and then be like, I don't have any business anymore, I don't know what to do. So this allows firms to have 3 years where you participate as a participating established business. In the first year, you'd get 75% credit for your work. Second year, 50%. Third year, 25%. With the goal that by the end of that third year, you've established yourself enough outside of the MBEW program in order to participate outside of it. Obviously, if you fall under the size standards after you've participated in this program, you can apply again for certification. It's not you graduate and you're gone. And then for construction, there are personal net worth limits, and there are size standards for your business. So if the owner's personal net worth limits exceed those caps, or if the business itself exceeds the size standards, you can participate in the phased graduation program. Just one thing to note, if you are a participating established business and you would like to seek out city work and have your 75, 50, 25% credit counted, please make sure that you tell your prime contractors ahead of time so that they can factor that into the compliance plan, because we don't want to see primes penalized for using a firm not knowing that they can only receive partial credit. Okay, so I just ran through our programs very, very fast because there's a lot of incentives and I want to talk about these. I have tried to break them into categories for you. There are construction-only incentives. There are non-construction only incentives, and then there are some that apply to both contracts. The way bid incentives work are they're an artificial price reduction to your bid price. So when you bid on a project, you will have your base bid. And then what we'll do, if you are eligible for any of these incentives, we will reduce your bid by the amount that you're eligible for, purely for the purposes of evaluating your bid compared to others. If you actually are awarded the contract, your bid amount is what the contract value is. So it's not the amount we reduce down to, it's what you've actually bid. So for just a simple example, if you have a $1 million bid, it's 2% incentive you're eligible to, we're gonna knock your bid down $20,000 for the purpose of evaluation. So you're being considered at $980,000 versus $1 million. But if you're awarded the contract, you got $1 million contract. I always get nervous when I say that because math is not my strong suit, but I think I got that right. There's two types of incentives within these categories. Most of our incentives are current incentives, meaning that you apply and the incentive is applied immediately to that contract. We also have two earned incentives or future incentives, where on the contract you are committing to do something and you earn the incentive at the end of the contract that you can apply to a future contract. But I'll get into the specifics of that in just a minute. So I'm going to start with some of our construction-only ones. Take a sip of my water. So the first one I'm going to talk about is our apprentice utilization incentive. So this is designed to encourage primes to use City College graduates or CPS graduates as apprentices on construction contracts for the city. This applies to construction contracts that are $100,000 or more. We don't typically have a lot of construction contracts that are below $100,000, so pretty much any city construction contract this would apply to. Apprentice means a person who's sponsored into an apprenticeship program that is by the contractor that's authorized by a union to sponsor apprentices, and the apprentice has to be enrolled in or graduated from a construction technology training program administered by city colleges, or is a graduate of CPS. So those are the two categories for this incentive. And this one is the earned incentive that I was mentioning. So how this works is on the contract, if you commit to using apprentices for 5 to 10% of the labor hours, you can get a 0.5% bid incentive if at the end of the contract you have actually met that requirement. And then if you have, we will give you what's called an earned credit certificate for that 0.5%. And then you can apply that for a future contract that you're bidding on. So then you would be able to take another contract of equal or greater value and apply that 0.5% incentive to your bid. You can use it for only one contract to win, but you can apply it to as many bids as you want within a 3-year period, but you can only win one contract. If you're applying to a bunch of bids at the same time and you want to try to get this incentive on each of them, if you end up winning all of those contracts, we'll have to have you decide. We'll have to take a look at which one is open first, which one is the one you want, because we can't let you get the incentive more than once. But like I said, if you are eligible for the incentive and you've actually at the end of the contract earned it, it's good for 3 years and you can win one contract. Equal employment opportunity. So this one's a little complicated when I explain it, but it's pretty straightforward when you see the bid package. I wish I had the copy with me. But this is designed to encourage the utilization of women and minorities on construction projects as journey workers, laborers, and apprentices. So if you've ever seen our construction contract package, we have a formula in there, a award criteria figure formula that you have to fill out. So basically it's like a box with a bunch of lines, and it'll say minority journey workers, women journey workers, minority apprentices, women, all the different categories. And you have to give us your commitment of the percentage of labor hours that you're going to utilize minority or women, minority or women journey workers, minority or women apprentices, minority or women laborers. Based on that, we do a calculation to come to what's called an award criteria figure. This is not a requirement, but we strongly encourage it because we want to see these numbers increase. There is a cap for the calculation of 15% for female workers and 70% for minority workers. The cap is purely for calculating the award criteria figure. Those aren't caps on you can't have greater participation than that. We don't ever want to try to minimize the participation. If you are going to be using individuals who are residing in socioeconomically disadvantaged areas, and those are defined by the Department of Planning and Development, you can be given 150% credit for each labor hour. So after we complete the formula, you have an award criteria figure. And that is what we use to evaluate all construction bids. If you have incentives that you're also eligible for, we'll then reduce that number by any incentives that you're eligible for. One thing to keep in mind with this one is that if you make a commitment, an EEO commitment, and you do not meet it, there are penalties associated with it, because we want to ensure that contractors are actually honoring their commitments, because the city will actually, the city and the city's residents will actually suffer harm if you've committed to utilizing minorities and women in these types of roles and then you do not follow through. So I'd encourage you to make sure you check out the ordinance and our rules for the program so you can see what those types of penalties are so you're not surprised, because we want to make sure that you're making commitments that you can actually meet. So next I'm going to talk about another one of our apprentice incentives. This, like the other one I talked about just a moment ago, is a future incentive. So this is for ex-offenders. It works very similar to the other incentive program, the other city colleges and CPS apprentice program one, incentive one. It's designed to encourage ex-offender apprentices. We have found that certain individuals, when they leave the criminal justice system, have a difficult time finding work, and we want to be able to create opportunities for them in this construction world. We work with the Department of Family and Support Services. I always seem to say that name wrong, but we work with them to recruit and screen individuals, so you don't have to just do guesswork and hire someone off the street. We work with DFSS. We work with delegate agencies to actually work with individuals to make sure they are job ready and capable of performing. So the amount of incentive you can earn, if 5 to 10% of the total labor hours are performed by eligible ex-offender apprentices, you can get 0.5% future incentive. 11 to 15%, you can get a 1% future incentive. Just like the CPS and City College's apprenticeship program, the credit can be used once, but you can apply it to as many bids as you'd like within a 3-year period, as long as you only win one contract with it.
But why is this only construction? There's lots of things where it's like pseudo-skilled labor that...
Sure. The question was, why is this only in construction? This program was adopted by City Council. This was an initiative that, I can't remember exactly how long it's been in place, but I think the area that they saw the most opportunity for immediately was in construction. Sure. But I think that the city's always open to growing and expanding our programs, so it's definitely something that could be under consideration. But just like the MBI program that we had for quite a while, and then we saw why not an MBI, so then the non-construction program was adopted. All of these programs, though, we operate under the authority granted to us in the Municipal Code of Chicago, so we don't just create these and decide we're doing them. We always have to operate under authority. So if there's any new programs, what we would do is typically individuals would reach out to their alderman and talk about the programs that they're interested in, talk to DPS, and then City Council will have to take action to adopt and create a new program or to expand an existing program. Okay, project area subcontractor bid incentive. So this is for construction programs as well. One thing that the city thought was important was that if we are spending money in the city on city-funded construction contracts, we want to make sure that city businesses are benefiting from that, city residents are benefiting from that, and not just city residents in general, although that's a positive thing. We want to make sure the area where the project's being performed is actually benefiting from it. So the way this works is if a prime contractor commits to using a subcontractor who is a small business that is located within the project area, and that project area is always going to be defined by the contract documents or the bid package, you can earn an incentive potentially up to 2%. And it's a tiered incentive. You can see the tiers on the slide there. And in order to receive this incentive, you'll need to make the commitment in an affidavit in the bid package. And you also have to provide us with some documentation to actually verify that the subcontractors are actually located in the project area, that they are actually small, that they have their licenses to perform, and a variety of other documentation we might need to verify that you're actually eligible for this incentive. If you are, though, you can earn the incentive on that particular contract up to a maximum of 2%. I have a little note on here because I want to make sure that you are aware of this. In addition to some of our other requirements, there is a requirement on city-funded construction contracts that 7.5% of the total labor hours have to be performed by project area residents, and 50% of the total labor hours have to be performed by city residents. So that is not an incentive, that's a requirement under the contract. Just wanted to make sure I called that out since we were talking project area and construction. Okay, so veteran-owned subcontractor utilization incentive. As the name would imply, this is to encourage the utilization of veteran-owned businesses as subcontractors. It's a tiered incentive, like many of our incentives. In order to be eligible, the bidder has to commit to utilizing veteran-owned subcontractors on the project. And when I say veteran-owned subcontractors, they have to be veteran-owned small local businesses certified by the City of Chicago as a VBE. So we have a VBE program. The certification process is similar to the MBEW process. When you're trying to apply for this incentive, we will need to see that certificate from the city verifying that the firm is actually a VBE. So it ranges from 0.5% to 2% bid incentive. Sure. Okay.
As far as this goes, when you're saying subcontract, would that include like material supply?
I think with this one, we have typically had subcontractors in the sense of actually, labor. I think if you're interested in applying it to materials, you could certainly apply for it, and that's something that we'd have to take under consideration and see what actual work that they're going to be performing, the percentage of the contract value that's going to be committed to supplies or materials. But typically when we talk about this one, we're talking about actual labor.
Okay.
Okay, city-based city-based manufacturers. Skipping my slides here. So this is designed to encourage using city-based manufacturers for goods. And this particular incentive applies to contracts for goods, commodities contracts. Sometimes if there's a materials-heavy construction contract, you'll also see it included there to apply it towards the goods portion, but this is something that applies to the purchase of goods. Manufacturers, they have to be licensed, taxed, and authorized to do business in the city in order to be eligible for this. And this is only for contracts for goods over $100,000. Unlike construction, we do have several small order type commodity contracts. This only applies to non-small order commodities. It's tiered. The smallest potential incentive is 1%, and the largest is 2%. Like the process for applying for most of these, there's an affidavit in there that you have to, in the bid package, you have to complete. You'll tell us the commitment you're making for local goods. You'll tell us who the manufacturer is, where they are. You're going to provide us with copies of the licenses so we can verify. And then if you're eligible, we will apply the incentive to your bid. Okay, now I'm shifting now into incentives that apply to both construction and non-construction contracts. The first being the alternately powered vehicles incentive. And I feel like the names spell out exactly what these incentives are, so I can stop reading the program goals. But in order to be eligible, the business has to be a local business located in the 6-county region. The majority of the fleet, and by that we mean at least 10 vehicles is what we consider a fleet, have to be located in and used in the 6-county region. And the majority of those vehicles have to be alternately powered. And what we mean by that is anything other than fuel, basically, natural gas, hydrogen, ethanol, electricity, or electric vehicles. That's the type of vehicle we mean. This is for $100,000 and more for contracts, so you'll never see this on a small order contract. And it is a 0.5% bid incentive. Okay, BEPD, business enterprises owned or operated by individuals with disabilities, people with disabilities. In order to be eligible for this, the prime contractor itself can be a BEPD or can commit to utilizing subcontractors who are BEPDs. In order to apply for this, though, the prime or subcontractors have to be certified by the city as a BEPD. It's a similar process for certification as all of our certification processes. And then when you apply, you'll have to submit the certificate showing us that the firm is actually certified. It's a tiered incentive ranging from 1% for a participation commitment of 2 to 5% of the contract value to 4% for a commitment of 14% or more of the contract value.
And where would we get the definition of what falls into disabilities?
That's available on our website and our certification regulations. You can also find it at 292.337, and I think it's 292.568, 567. Sometimes there are a lot of similar numbers. They all get jumbled. Sorry, did you have a question? Oh, generally, falling within this category is individuals with disabilities, so physical impairments as well as service-disabled veterans can fall within this category as well. Okay, city-based businesses. This is the 3 different types of incentive all rolled into one name. So obviously, it's designed to encourage the use of city-based businesses. We want to make sure that if we're using city funds, we're benefiting city businesses. So it's for contracts $100,000 or more, so you'll never see it on a small order contract. But let's dive into each of the different categories. So the first category, 4%. So this is an incentive if you are a city-based business, meaning your main office and meaningful day-to-day businesses are actually occurring in a location in the city of Chicago. The majority of your regular full-time workforce actually works out of that office that is in Chicago. You hold all licenses. You're subject to all applicable city taxes. You are eligible for the 4% incentive.
This is not construction.
This is any contract. So any contract over $100,000, I should say that. So if in addition to that, you also have the majority of your regular full-time workforce, they're also city residents, not just working out of the city, but they're city residents, you can be eligible for the 6% incentive. And then if in addition to that, the majority of those residents live in socioeconomically disadvantaged areas, you can be eligible for the 8% incentive. So this is one of our larger incentives, up to 8%. You can't get all 3. It's 4%, 6%, or 8%. You can, in order to apply, you do have to provide proof that you are actually eligible. So if you're applying for the 6 or 8%, you're going to have to give us documentation demonstrating that your employees actually live at addresses located in the proper areas. You're going to have to show us that you have your business licenses, where your address is, just so we can verify and make sure firms are actually eligible for this. And here is just a map. This is controlled by the Department of Planning and Development. It will always be included in your bid package so you can see where the areas are. But if the majority of your city resident employees live within these highlighted areas, you can potentially be eligible for the 8% incentive. Okay. Bid incentive to encourage MBEW Gestation. So on certain contracts, there are either not enough certified firms in the areas in which you would typically see subcontracting opportunities, or the work is very specialized in a way that we wouldn't be able to identify meaningful opportunities for certified firms. We won't assign a contract goal. So in that case, if the contract has 0 goals, we don't just not want you to look to MBWBEs. We always encourage you to find opportunities for certified firms. So if the contract has no goals and you're actually finding opportunities for MBWB firms, you can apply for this incentive. It's a tiered incentive based on the percentage of the contract value you're committing to utilize the MBE or WBE firm. So if it's 5% of the total contract value, it's 0.75% bid incentive, up to 2% if 30% and more. 30% or more. And the participation can be on the prime or subcontractor level. And one thing that's different from our standard minority and women-owned business enterprise commitment participation requirements is in this one, you can actually use direct or indirect credit. For MBEWB credit, if with our regular goals, you can only apply direct credit towards the goal, but this you can actually use indirect credit as well. Okay, another one of our veteran-owned business enterprise incentives. This is a prime contractor level one. So there's 2 ways to apply for this incentive. You can be a veteran-owned small local business certified by the city as a VPE. You can apply for this incentive on your own. Also, you can team, if you're a veteran-owned business but you're not small, you can team up with a small local business and collectively as a joint venture apply for this incentive. There are some requirements if you are a joint venture, though. So members have to be a small business enterprise, a veteran-owned business enterprise, or both. At least one member has to be a veteran-owned business. The small businesses collectively have to have at least 30% interest in the joint venture. And the JV partners have to self-perform at least 20% of the work. And one thing just to note is we won't consider brokers as joint venture members. We want to see actual meaningful participation by all members.
Can you expand on those?
Brokers we see typically if you're just kind of passing through commodities. So if like if you don't have an actual storefront, you're just ordering something from the internet and then passing it along, you're not actually, you're not actually doing something, right? So this applies to any contract over $100,000, and it's a 5% flat incentive. There's no tiers here. It's just if you meet these requirements and you're eligible, we will apply a 5% bid incentive.
So this one wouldn't be like a regular prime contractor, joint venture with a veteran contractor? It wouldn't be like that?
So this is on the prime level. So the prime contractor would be the joint venture, and a veteran-owned firm would have to form a joint venture with a small local business enterprise.
So the prime does not have to be veteran-owned?
Well, it does in the sense that either you have to be a VBE alone, certified by the city, or you have to be a joint venture that is comprised of at least one veteran-owned business.
What if it was a DBE electrical contractor and a SDEOB supplier? Would that count?
As long as it's an actual supplier, not just a pass-through type broker, then we would consider that. Yeah. So for all of these incentives, you have to submit an affidavit explaining how your joint venture works, and we'll consider the relationship, what the parties are doing, so we can verify that at least 30% of the joint venture is performed by small businesses, however that is composed of with your performance. But as long as these requirements are met, that's what we're concerned about. Okay, this is the last incentive. Man, I'm flying through these today. Usually it takes me a lot longer to go through these. So this is our newest incentive, and it is our largest incentive. This is our diverse workforce and management bid incentive. So this is designed to encourage our contractors to employ a diverse workforce and management. There's two different tiers that can be combined. If you employ a diverse workforce and at least 10 to 20% of your workforce is diverse, you can earn a 2% incentive. Over 40% of your firm is diverse, your business is diverse, 6% bid incentive. And then if in addition to that, you also have diverse management, 10 to 20% of your management's diverse, 0.5% incentive. Over 40% of your management's diverse, a 4% incentive. So technically you could potentially earn up to 10% bid incentive through this incentive. The business itself doesn't have to be local. The only requirement is the diversity of your workforce. And 292-407 is the ordinance that authorizes this if you're looking for specifics of what we mean by minority. By diverse.
It's almost impossible to even read on here, it's so tiny.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I was packing so much information on these slides. So I know, I probably should cut them down, but I want to make sure when you leave, you actually have all this information handy. So I kind of touched on this as we went, but just want to make sure you understand how the incentives actually work.
Can you go back to that and read the code, because I really can't read it.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's 292-407. So the bid package, which is the documents that actually tell you what it is that we're buying, or seek to buy, are going to include all of the explanation of these incentives and all the affidavits that we need you to complete if you're interested in applying for them. So they'll all be in there. If you're bidding on something and you don't see it, there will always be a procurement specialist named in the package as a contact person, and you can contact them during the Q&A period and ask, where's this incentive, does it apply? And we'll be happy to answer that. If we're missing one, we'll issue an addendum so that all the incentives will be in there. You have to submit your affidavit and all the requested documentation. If you don't submit the documentation, we cannot give you the incentive. So if you submit an affidavit and you're missing something, we will follow up and ask you for it. But if you refuse to give it to us, then we can't give you the incentive, because then we can't meaningfully verify that you are actually eligible for the incentive. If eligible, I mentioned your bid will be reduced in the amount of the incentive that you've earned, only for evaluation purposes. Most of our incentives can be combined. if you're eligible for more than one incentive, we will always take your base bid and reduce it by the percentage you're eligible for. Put that number aside, and then we'll take the next incentive, your base bid, reduce it by that number, take that aside, and then we'll subtract the base bid by all of those amounts to get to what your amount will be for evaluation purposes. There are some incentives, though, that you cannot combine. And I'm sorry, this is a very tiny font slide. There's a lot of information on here. I tried to put on here all of the incentives that you can't put together.
I think the slides also available online to download.
Oh, yes, thank you. The slides are available online to download if you don't take it. You can probably zoom in and blow it up on those slides. But the 4, 6, and 8% city-based business incentive, I mentioned already that you can't combine that. It's either the 4, the 6, or the 8%. One thing to note is with the city-based manufacturer incentive, we're already giving an incentive for using a city-based manufacturer, so we're not going to also give an incentive for being a city-based business because you're a city-based business by manufacturing the goods. Also, you can't combine it with the project area subcontractor utilization incentive or the veteran-owned subcontractor utilization incentive. Mainly, those are all local types incentives, and we're already giving one incentive for your local manufacturer. So if you are eligible for all of these, you kind of have to take you have to decide which of these you want to apply for based on which gives you the biggest incentive, basically. The project area subcontractor utilization incentive, mentioned it can't be combined with the manufacturer utilization incentive. The two different types of veteran incentives, they cannot be combined, so you can either get the prime level one, the 5% incentive, or the tiered subcontractor VBE incentive. So that's the list of the ones that cannot be combined. If it's not on this list, then you can combine as many as you'd like. After you're awarded their contract, you're likely going to be required to submit documentation throughout the course of the contract and at closeout verifying you actually met your commitments. Most of our incentives by ordinance have give the CPO the authority to fine the contractor up to 3 times the amount of the incentive earned if you don't meet your commitments at the end of the contract. So if you've made a commitment to use veteran-owned businesses, VBEs, or BEPDs for a certain percentage of the work, and then you don't give them that opportunity to perform, at the end of the contract, it's within the CPO's discretion to issue this fine. We can also find you non-responsible. Responsibility is assessment of a bidder's capability, I can't seem to speak English today, sorry. It's whether the bidder is actually capable and we trust the bidder to perform is what we mean by responsibility. So if you're making commitments for incentives and then you're not following through, that's going to make the city wonder if you are a trustworthy vendor and if it's going to be wise for the city to issue work. So we may issue a finding of non-responsibility. If we do that, then you're not allowed to bid on city work, or your bid will not be considered. Okay, so I ran through those really fast, and I know I took a couple questions as we went. Our website does have all of the rules for these programs and incentives. They're up there. The DPS legal department is always happy to answer any questions you have about how they work, with the small caveat of saying if there is an open bid that you're bidding on, we can't answer specifics because in the interest of fairness and competition, we don't want to give anyone an advantage. But you can always submit your question through the Q&A process, and then we will issue an addendum with the answer to your question. But if anyone has any questions now about how these work, or just any questions about doing business with the city in general, I'm happy to take questions. Yes. I wasn't really passing this around earlier, but just so we have it.
So as far as when bids come in, all of these percentages that you went over, is there a hierarchy? Like, okay, if you have this, then you get this, then we're taking this into consideration for this person's bid first. So is it a hierarchy of how you are looking at the bids based on this criteria?
Not necessarily. So when we receive bids and we read them aloud, we're only reading your base bid. So the bid incentives aren't factored in at that point. Typically what we'll do is we're going to take a look at the lowest bidder and typically the next two, and we'll start applying incentives. We'll take a look at the other ones to see if there are enough potential incentives to make it worthwhile to make those calculations. But typically we look at the first couple bids to see who applied for incentives, and then we'll start applying them all to the base bid to see, based on who is if the apparent low bidder changes as a result of the incentives. The only time we would really consider which incentive to apply first is if you've applied for incompatible incentives. In that case, we look to the ordinance, and then we'll also check with the vendor about which one are you trying to apply for based on which could give you the greater incentive, typically. Hopefully that answered your question.
And if you win a bid, the percentages that you went over are not met, are they subtracted from the bid? Is that what I understood? Like if it's 100,000 and there's 1% that you could have gotten a credit for, but you did not, you don't get the full amount of the bid?
So the way it works for most of them, if you apply for an incentive, you're making a commitment to do something on the contract. So we'll apply the incentive to your bid if, based on what you've told us, it seems like you're eligible for the incentive. And then at the end of the contract, a contract closeout, if you've not met your commitment, you'll be fined potentially up to 3 times the amount of the incentive that you've earned. So whatever that percentage reduction is, we could potentially fine you for not meeting your commitments at the end. So it's always good to keep in mind when you're applying for these incentives that you need to meet your commitments.
Well,
So.
I'm not meaning as far as you applied for the incentive.
Right.
If you just applied for a $100,000 contract and there was no incentive, there was no credit or anything on your bid itself. If you were even eligible for a percentage, is that subtracted, or you don't even take that into consideration?
If you haven't applied for it, do you mean? I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm understanding your question.
You said that if you get $1 million bid, and then there's a 20%.
Or 2%, or yeah.
Reduction, then you would get 980,000, but if you met that, you would get the full
Oh,
amount.
no, so I probably didn't explain that well. So if it's a $1 million bid and you're eligible for a 2% incentive, we would reduce your bid by $80,000. I can't do math right now, but we would reduce your bid by 2%, so it'd be $980,000 just for evaluating. But if you win the contract, you get the whole $1 million that you bid. So we're just reducing it, and that percentage we're taking off of your bid is just so that we evaluate. We ultimately are going to award you a contract in the amount that you bid that you say you could perform the work for. Does that answer? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Any other questions?
Mine is in regards to the ex-offender.
Mhm.
For that one, so that one's not like you fill out an application and submit it. That's kind of like at the beginning of the contract, and then if you use them throughout, and then you get those credits at the end.
Yeah, that's the ex-offender apprenticeship incentive is an earned credit one. So at the contract bid time, you'll submit an affidavit saying, I'm committing to use ex-offender apprentices for XYZ% of the total labor hours. And at the end of the contract closeout, we'll actually need to verify that that percentage of labor hours was performed by eligible ex-offenders, and we'll give you the earned credit that you can then use it's valid for 3 years. You can win one contract with it.
Okay, and then my other question was in regards to the diversity credit.
Mhm.
So for that one, I think I'll be able to just, if I look it up on the ordinance, but I know on there I read before that you submit your application with your affidavits to the procurement officer. Is that still how it goes, or do I need to actually mail them in as well?
As long as they're submitted to DPS and make it to the chief procurement officer so she knows you're trying to get an incentive, whether you do that with your package and you submit it or you send it in ahead of time, as long as we get it. There's no special way to submit it.
For the affidavits that we submit from the subcontractors, do you go from a year back from the date it's submitted, or a year back from what date you start counting?
I think we've looked back a year. How have we done it before? I'm trying to think of what the last one we've done, because we haven't gotten many applications for it, to be honest. We're trying to encourage participation in it. But I think we look at 1 year back from the time of performance. So you could have an active contract still that you're earning credit on that you could apply for. If you have contracts, though, that are different from that, don't hesitate to submit your application for consideration, because the Affirmative Action Advisory Board is wanting to promote this program and wants to ensure that we're encouraging the use of MBEWs in the private sector, so we'll take it under consideration.
And you said you looked back 1 year or back 3? That's all I had read on it, that it was 3.
You know, to be honest, I have to look at the ordinance because I can't remember off the top of my head right now. But I can give you my card. I think I have cards with me. If you want to email me your question, and I apologize for not having a ready answer for you, but I wish I had all the specifics of all of these memorized. But we can talk more about that. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay. I'll stick around then till 3. If anyone else wants to come up and ask questions, but thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks. It's so warm in here.
Oh, my